who are you? Now, this might seem to be a fairly trivial question to answer. You might consider talking about your name or your age or your occupation. But I would argue that's got nothing to do with who you are at all. These things are labels, and labels are useful for us in order to be able to communicate with each other. It's a tool, right? But it isn't actually you. Now that you are thinking about who you are, and I'm suggesting try to think about who you are and not answer it with labels, right? It does raise another interesting question. As you are thinking about who you are, who is the you that is thinking about who you are? Are you looking at yourself, trying to look at yourself objectively? I mean, that's what people will try to do if they want to be honest about who they are and look at themselves. I need to understand me. You need to understand yourself, but what? You are yourself. Why would you need to understand yourself when you are that very thing? Who's asking in the dynamic between, the asker of the question and the subject of the question, if they're both you? And this is quite an interesting riddle, but there is a thing that helps with this, is to realize that you already know who you are. You just can't put it into words. And this is the thing I think that we, in this modern age, we lose sight of. We confuse the quest to be able to describe who we are, put ourselves into words, with actually who we are. This is connected with the question of the ineffable and the effable. Ineffable means that it cannot be put into words. Effable means it can be put into words. You are ultimately ineffable. You cannot be put into words. Not the full you. And this is why it can feel futile, or at least very, very difficult to come up with an answer. Who are you? Answer to that question, who are you? Without it coming across as somewhat trite. Like game shows, for example. So when you have a contestant on a game show, and that's going to, they're going to ask, who this person is. They have to represent this person, you see. We can't just have someone on a game show up. We don't know anything about them. Yeah, but the reality is that we're not going to know anything about them, and we're not really going to care either. You're not going to remember their name later. But we go through the motion anyway. William James from Doncaster. He's a school teacher. Yay! Why do we even bother? I remember once. Oh yes, I remember. It wasn't that long ago, but when I was teaching, right, we had our pictures up on the wall. And, when they first did this, I think the pictures sort of had some text on them to say something like 30 years experience in game development, something like that. But then in the later years, so we had this person, the dean. The dean didn't seem to be very keen on, let's say, Well, labels, I suppose. And I'm just hesitating there because I'm thinking, well, that probably was a good thing. It was an interesting debate. Anyway, the point is that the 30 or 40 years experience of game development disappeared, which was annoying for those of us who had that. You know, I got into a bit of trouble with the dean when we went to a kind of internal conference, and on my badge I had put game developer. I didn't put lecturer in game development. And I was making a point. She picked up on this. And it was, I have to admit, it was something that was bothering me. I was trying to say, I did not feel that my experience was being fully utilized. But there was something more than that. It was the fact that for me, video game development was a passion that I devoted my life to. I was a pioneer. There aren't many people who can say they're a pioneer in video game industry, and I can. And I don't say that to boast. I say it's because it's a fact. It's just part of who I am. I took that journey. Anyway, she couldn't understand why I did that. I was saying because who I am, is it better represented by the concept that I'm a lecturer with a job function, or that I've been a game developer my entire life? I don't know whether she got the point or not. But it's the thing, the labels that we use to describe ourselves bear no real resemblance or relationship to who we actually are. And so when you are puzzling over the question, who are you? What you're actually struggling to do is to find the words to describe something that cannot be described in words. And so this is why it is difficult. But what's interesting is that people then can think that the difficulty in finding words to adequately describe themselves means that they don't understand themselves. And you see, you don't need language in order to understand something. It's, for example, I remember being in school and stuck in a classroom, which is this thing that they do to children, they stick them in a classroom. And it's like being trapped. It's like I didn't really want to be in that classroom. But I was a teenager at that point. The damage had been done, to be honest. If I had the freedom to escape the school, and what would I do? I wouldn't know what to do with myself, because, But something caught my eye, or my senses, as I looked out of the window, and there was a leaden sky. And over the trees, because out of the window there was... I was sort of in the suburbs of London, right? So there are places that you can be in a city where you, if you're lucky, you look out and you see trees. Lots of people don't. I tell you, it's very healthy if you can, and if you do. Because instead of it being buildings and traffic and so on, there were trees at the end of the grounds of the school, which were quite big. And beyond the trees, the leaden sky. I looked at that, and it just grabbed me. I understood something about the sky and the trees and the world outside. I can't really put it into words. I'm trying. What was that feeling? I recall that feeling. It's sort of like a... it's like a resonance with a missing piece. It's like trying to describe a colour. I can't, but I understand it. And it was a place I wanted to be. You could say ultimately anywhere other than here. But it's more than that. And I don't know what it means in terms of language, but I do understand it. We must have relationships like that with ourselves, but we get so used to our own presence that maybe we lose sight of these things, or we lose the feeling of them. Who are you? I know who I am, but I can't put it into words. The problem is that what happens with our language and the words that we use to describe everything, including ourselves, is that they get confused for the reality. I think it would be really helpful for people if they could, from time to time, stop thinking in words and just experience. But we live in a world right now where that seems to be increasingly difficult. If you're watching my videos, for example, you're listening to my words. Maybe it doesn't matter what the words are, though. Maybe there's a lot more communication going on. In fact, the interesting part is not really the words, but everything else. What is the everything else? The gap between the words? The copious arm movements? The long pauses? The beard? We're in a world right now where everything is delivered, cut up, optimized. Jump cuts everywhere, right? Most people who do videos there with jump cuts. There's no cut here. What does that mean? It means that if you're in a hurry, my videos are not ones that you might want to watch, right? Because you're busy. I'm not a YouTuber for busy people. Because seriously, what do we do? How are we going to find out who we are if we're forever jumping from one thing to another? If we're forever chopping the gaps, chopping the hesitations? Is the point of a video like this to sort of ram information down? No, it isn't. I'm just having a conversation with an imaginary you. Now, you're not imaginary. Well, you're not imaginary as you watch this, but you are imaginary right now as I say it. So anyway, language, and who are you? The language trap. The funny thing is that it cuts back to the question of usefulness. So you may have heard of course of meditation. At least I don't know how much people talk about meditation these days. I didn't really understand what meditation is until I studied Alan Watts. I say studied, I've listened to Alan Watts a lot, as anybody who knows Alan Watts will realise from my ramblings as well. They're very inspired by Alan Watts. But meditation, I used to try meditation because it was supposed to be good for me. No, you don't do that. Meditation is not something you do because it's good for you. If you try to do meditation because meditation would be good for you, it won't work. And it won't even be meditation. It can't have a purpose. Because describe the purpose by which you will be meditating. You're back into the language trap. You see, language, as useful as it is a trap. And the actual purpose of meditation is to stop using the language. I think being comfortable with the idea that, we don't need to think in words, symbols and concepts in order to be alive. That there is something beyond. There is something beyond that. Ultimately, we can appreciate and observe and understand things without the use of any language at all. It's just a different kind of understanding. The understanding that I had when I was struck by the leaden sky. I really wish that we could come up with a kind of common language to describe the things that we can't put into words. We've managed to do that with colours. There are a huge number of different names for colours. But I suppose that's easy because a thing has a colour and then we can point at it and agree what we'll call that. That's how we know what red is when we see red. You see something that's red, it's because you've been told all your life that that particular colour that you see is called red. If you're in English, right? But I have no idea if you see the same red that I see. If your red might be my green and my green might be your red. And there's absolutely no way of knowing. I see the colour. I appreciate the colour. Even without words. So when we go back to the question of who are you? It's good to try and appreciate yourself, who you are, without the use of labels, without the use of words. I mean, might not help you make friends. It might not help you, get likes on a post. I don't know. So today I thought about who I really am, And then suddenly I saw myself. The end. It's not really a compelling narrative, is it? But what it can do is it can help you find tranquility within yourself. Because if you can understand, if you can see yourself in that way, right, then from that point you start, or from there you have begun, or you have achieved a kind of unification of yourself with yourself. Because the problem with trying to answer the question, who am I, is that by asking the question, you have in effect split yourself off from yourself. Even the very act of asking the question. It's like there is a you that's quizzing one part of you, that's quizzing the other part of you. You need to understand yourself, but not ask the question. Because you don't want to ask the question. And if somebody else asks you the question, who are you? You should probably, well, it's difficult because you know what they really mean by that. But I think the purest answer to that is just to be yourself. No hang up. See? Why do we get hung up? This kind of splitting of ourself from ourself, which seems to be primarily a result of the use of our language. That's the cause for hang-ups. I mean, had a cup of tea, but if I was to go, shall I pick this up or not? Right? The trap we can fall into is to do an analysis of the idea and then come to the conclusion of whether or not we will execute the action and then execute the action. Why? It doesn't actually make much sense when we could just say the decision and the action are in fact one and the same. That is, I haven't made the decision to pick up the cup until I do. That's not having a hang-up, you see. Decision and action at the same moment. Wouldn't it be great if we could all live our lives that way?